Associate Professor of Games and Learning at in the School of Art, Media and Technology I had to actually have this on because it's such a long name.
Very long.
At Parsons School of Design at the New School. So he will talk about how to make games more inclusive. So please welcome John Sharp.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny. So most of what Jenny said is true. So I make games. I've been making games now for about 20 years, though for the first decade of that, I didn't actually think of myself as a game designer. I just thought of myself as a designer. 2 games here, the metagame, a card game, and a new game that local number 12 is working on, Lost Words. It's a word puzzle game in which you make puzzles out of literature, like Moby Dick and Jane Eyre and that sort of thing. I teach at the New School, and along with Colleen Macklin, I run a little research group called Pet Lab. And we do a lot of work using games and play as a form of social discourse. We've done a lot of work with the Red Cross, developed a game curriculum for kids that was funded by the National Endowment for the Arts and things like that. I write a lot. My first book, Works of Game, it looks at the way games and art intersect. And then just back in June, Colleen, again, we do a lot of work together. We published a game design textbook, Games, Design, and Play. Probably the distinguishing feature of that is that all of the examples we use in the book come from indie games with only a few exceptions. And further, we worked really hard with the book to make sure we had a very diverse range of game makers and games represented. So at least half the games that we talk about in the book are made by women. At least a quarter of the book the games are made by people of color, and there's a large representation of people identifying themselves within the LGBTQ movement. I'm a curator. I have an art history PhD, and that sort of turned into the scholarly side of my work. 2 of the exhibitions I curated, one was celebrating the 50th anniversary of Space War, and then another one that I co-curated with Akira Thompson, Celia Pierce, and Cindy Paremba, XYZ, was looking at games in which women had important roles, whether the designers or they own the company, they're the producers, programmers, what have you. And then finally, I've done a lot of conference organizing in my career. I was the co-chair for 5 different editions of Indiecade, and then I've co-organized 2 different art history of games conferences. So all of this probably suggests that I have a pretty broad point of view when it comes to games, and that's true. As I was sitting this morning in my hotel room looking at the program, and I hadn't realized how many talks within the conference were actually about inclusivity. And I was like, oh dear, is there going to be anything left for me to talk about today? And I think, yes, there are a few things left, because instead of looking at this from the point of view of industry, I'm thinking a lot more about games as culture and us as people, in addition to being game makers and game players. So yeah, we have an inclusivity problem. Actually, there's a whole bunch of problems that are going on. And so I'd like to look at a few of what I see as the biggest issues. And the first of them is what I call video game fundamentalism. We tend to have this very narrow view of what we're thinking about when we think about what a video game can be. I refer to it as the aesthetic of meaningful choice, that we think that games have to be won, that they need to be driven by systems. There's an emphasis on player choice and the meaningful outcomes of those choices. That's a kind of game, yes, but it is not all games. And yet, that is what comes to mind for almost everyone. Competition, beating the game. We think games are about mastery, that they're about depth of experience, that there's something we can come back to and play and again and get something different every time. We see games as only being able to tell us certain kinds of stories, the kind that tend to involve wizards or space marines or little tiny plumbers, or maybe sports celebrities, and of course, lots and lots of cartoon characters. Now, I think all of this leads to what I call fundamentalism, that we have this very narrow point of view. Perhaps this is my American in me coming out, but the first thing I always think of as an example is religious extremism. That the way we think about video games isn't that different than the way the Roman Catholic Church thinks about how one ought to or not ought to behave, or for that matter, kind of the American Pentecostal belief systems, where there's very much a right and there's very much a wrong way to do things. And if you fall outside those purviews, then you must be wrong. And that's the way, as game players and game developers, we too often think about what we do. But I think we've got to be really clear that most of this stuff is just a matter of taste. It's personal preference. And somehow that gets codified and calcified into these hard beliefs that we follow. I think somewhat connected to that, video game consumerism. That one of these sort of fundamentalist beliefs is games are media products. They're things that not that long ago used to be shrink wrapped. Now they're things that we download on Steam or an app store, that sort of thing. An analogy I like to use around consumerism is I think of video game culture being not that different than the culture around opera music, right? Except with a much darker and maddening turn. What was once a vital and popular medium turns inward, becomes more and more esoteric and obscure, and suddenly isn't for everyone. That it just becomes this product. I don't think we have to think much further than the absolutely baroque game controllers that come equipped with all of our consoles. Very few people in the world know how to use these things. I, as somebody who's been playing games since the 70s, perhaps even the 60s, I'm that old, still have a hard time dealing with these controllers. And I'm somebody that's devoted a good portion of my life to games. I think part of the problem in thinking of games from a consumerist point of view is when we treat them like products, we might as well be in the razor blade business, right? We're kind of forgetting games are a medium, they're an art form, that there's a lot more to them than just selling them and marketing them. Video game quantification, another issue I see that's getting in the way of inclusiveness. We have an overemphasis on being able to quantify the value of games. We love Metacritic scores. We love thinking about frame rates and how fast a game can run on a machine, the highest resolution, the newest platforms, the most responsive interfaces, everything we want to be able to quantify. And I think a lot of what drives video games as a medium comes out of the information age. A couple of years ago, Eric Zimmerman wrote a well-received essay talking about this being the ludic century, that games are going to be this form that gets us past the information age and into this new age driven by play. I see that a little bit differently. I think video games, because we're so heavily reliant on information technologies, on quantification, that we're just yet another symptom of the information age. We're not actually a solution to that problem. Video game exceptionalism. Somehow, this first 6,000 years or so of games got erased as soon as Pong showed up. We somehow are forgetting that we're part of a much, much longer tradition that didn't start in the early 1970s. Instead, it goes back to the very origins of culture thousands and thousands of years ago. There's a video game isolationism. applies to both the way we play games, applies to the limited subcultures that see something for themselves in games. It's the way that games seem to be obsessed with games, that we don't tend to look too far beyond to music, to film, to literature, to all the other rich mediums out there. We tend to only want to look as far as our own genres. There's a lot of sameness going on with games. The kind of games that we make, the kinds of games that we play, the people for whom we make these games, the people that make the games themselves. There's just a vast sea of vanilla sameness going on far too often. I think really of this homogeneity and the perceptions around that, probably the worst is that the perception that you need to be a white male, preferably with a computer science background, in order to be part of this medium. So I think all of these things, for me, suggest that video games as a medium are ultimately extremely exclusionary, kind of the opposite of inclusive. Video games keep away people who aren't willing or interested in delving into the esoteric minutiae. Video games keep away people that don't want to make the kinds of games that are already out there. Video games keep away people that don't have the skill sets that we claim are necessary, and the only way is to get it done. Video games keep away people that don't look like and act like those they see playing the games and those they see making the games. So that's a lot of problems. It's a lot of complaining I just did. So what can we do about this? So what I'd like to do now is kind of walk back through each of these points and think about it from the individual perspective. So as a person, many of you are young and just getting started in the industry. So what are things that we can do that can make a difference and to actually make the industry more inclusive? So instead of fundamentalism, let's think in terms of openness. So instead of assuming that we know what does or doesn't qualify as a game, let's assume that if someone calls a work they've made a game, that they're right. And let's try to understand why they feel that way. What is it about that work that for them they want to embrace as a game? Because believe me, for a lot of people, it might be easier for them not to call the works they make games because they'd get a lot less grief. But they feel driven to do this. So let's try to understand why they feel this way. Ultimately, it really boils down to being open to multiple points of view, to being able to see past our own. And when we can't understand it with the experiences and the knowledge we have, let's ask others to help us. Instead of seeing video games as a form of consumerism, let's think of them as a form of culture. So this means a couple of things. One is that we're accountable to our communities and to the people around us, both about how they engage with games and the kinds of behavior that merge out of game cultures. I think more importantly, it means being constructively critical about games. We can both love something and find issues with it, and to hold it accountable, to hold ourselves accountable. If we really respect games, then we have to open up and we have to be vocal when we see something wrong, when we feel somebody's being left out, even if that might make us uncomfortable, even if it might ruffle some feathers. Instead of thinking about the kind of quantification of everything, let's instead think in terms of aesthetics. So instead of being concerned with how many hours it takes to play a game or the realism of its graphics, instead let's think about how it made us feel to play it. What are the emotions that get pulled to the surface by this particular game? What are the ideas explores? Those are the more interesting ways, the qualitative ways to investigate a game. Because that's what aesthetics ultimately are at their best. They provide us perspectives for seeing art in new and more diverse and deeper ways than we might otherwise. Instead of video game exceptionalism, let's be video game omnivores. Instead of thinking that they're unique and that it's the only medium we should pay attention to, instead we should be seeing what we can learn from every other medium out there. What can architecture teach us? What can illustration and animation? What can fashion, sculpture, comics, dance? All of these things have so much to teach us as players and as game makers. Getting past the view that computer science is at the root of everything video games is problematic. There's been a move toward thinking terms of like cognitive psychology as well. That also lends something. But that's still staying in this realm of trying to quantify and master and understand. Instead of being isolated, let's connect. So we should be thinking about games as part of a much larger cultural conversation and not as an isolated medium. We should be bringing people in to games, either as players or as game makers, that we think have something to add, kind of like Richard Barta was talking about earlier today when he sees a student with that glimmer, with that little bit of difference that he wants to foster and encourage that. We should be doing that with our friends and with our families and those around us. Diversity. So this is both in terms of the kinds of play that we enjoy, but also the kinds of games that we make. It's also about the people, right? That we need a lot more diversity in the folks who are playing games and making them and critiquing them. We need more women. We need a lot more variety of cultural backgrounds, a lot more points of view brought in. I think we need more people from different educational backgrounds coming into play. The program Colleen Macklin and I teach in at the New School, MFA Design and Technology, our program this year is 60% women. We have 30 different nationalities represented. But guess what? The word games is nowhere in the name of our program. Most students who come to us who end up making games in our program discover them from within the program. They have folks like myself and Colleen and Nick Fortuno and Robert Yang there who let them see that, oh wait, games can be something much more than I thought they were. And as a result, we've had a number of students go on to careers in the game industry to win awards, but never would they have imagined games, never would they have probably come to our program if games had been in that title. So I guess a different way to think of this inclusion topic is embracing. That we should be making video games embracing of other points of view, of other people. I guess what I'm saying is I want us to embrace games as a medium and all the possibilities that are laying out there. Let's think past genre. Let's think about past what is there now to what it can become. Let's not assume that games are a closed topic. Let's not assume that the best people are already here making games. Let's assume that many of them are still out there to be found and to be brought into the fold. Let's not assume that we already know the exact skill sets one needs to have in order to be a vibrant and active participant in game making. I'm a former punk rocker, and most things that relate to hippies as a result kind of, I don't know, they make me frightened. But one thing from 60s activism that's always stuck with me is this phrase, think globally, act locally. And I think at the end of the day, that's all any of us can really do around any issue that we have close to heart, any medium, anything we love. We need to think about the bigger picture, and then we need to figure out how we can go about doing something to enact that on a small human scale where it's just us. We're not a huge corporation. So a couple of final points I'd like to make around this then. One of them, I think, is to find the play in everything. So look at dance and music and art and film and literature and see where the play already lies in those. And then figure out how we can bring those things into games. Explore new ways of making. So let's get past the ways that have been established for making games, for conceiving of them. Let's think of new ways, things we can borrow from other disciplines that can help us change the medium from the inside out. Make for people and not for markets, which, like many of the points I'm raising, probably seems quite obvious, but it's often forgotten, right? I know local number 12 with our word puzzle game Lost Words, we get caught up in this quite often, where we're looking at the App Store demographics and seeing what kinds of games are going well, and it's led to some bad decisions that we've had to unwind in the process of working on this game. But thinking about people, even thinking about specific individuals that you want to see playing your game, I think that is a really smart way to go about making the industry more inclusive. And I think ultimately it's all about trying to find ways to connect games to life and not to allow it to be this sort of isolated, somewhat esoteric pop culture medium. Now, to all of us, this probably, you're thinking to yourself, well, games are deeply connected to my life already, right? But we're on the inside. How can we connect games to life beyond us? And I think one of the only ways this is going to happen is through diversity and through inclusion and through embracing things. You know, there's a lot I think we can learn about this by rewinding to prior to 1972, before Pong, into seeing the role that games had in people's lives in the past, how it was always this very rich form connected to everyday life. It's how people bonded, it's how people learned, it's all sorts of things. I think we can get back to that if we connect games back to life. Thank you. It's like we have 5 minutes. 7 minutes. Any questions? I think my mic, oh, there it is, it's on. Yes. I think you have to wait until the microphone is put in your hand.
Hi, thanks for a great talk, John. You have video games on most of your slides.
Yep.
Not all. Why aren't you inclusive in talking about making all types of games and talking about video games?
The short answer to that question is, one, that was one of the themes I was asked to speak to. But in my mind, every time the word video game is up there, I'm just thinking game. I don't actually even as an academic, we have to kind of make that differentiation, I suppose, sometimes between that we are here specifically speaking of video game and not just games as a whole. But I think that's part of the problem right there, right? Is that we think video games, talking about this sort of exceptionalism, we tend to think video games don't have that much to do with regular games, or let alone sports, God forbid, right? This whole other class of game out there that outside of sports sims tends to fall completely out of our conversation. Other questions?
No one? Because I have the microphone right here.
Happy to take refutations to everything I said as well. Does anybody think I'm completely off the deep end here? Jenny does. Oh, no, she has a question.
Actually, the opposite, because just as a comment, I think that working with inclusivity and all, I think just the part of speaking of games as culture is really helpful, because we've also noticed, and I think that is also what you meant when you have more than half of your class being female, because you don't mention games, but I bet you mention some, arts and perhaps graphics. The thing is that you can mention games, but you have to add graphics to it, and then you will have more female applicants, for instance. So.
Yeah, the two specific courses that we refer to as our gateway drugs to games. One is called Narrative and Dynamic Systems that Nick Fortuno teaches, that basically is teaching you kind of a way to think about procedural storytelling, right? And then the other one is a class Robert Yang teaches called Building Worlds, which is a Unity class in which they're making their own environment and they're making some sort of playful activity inside of that. And it's those two classes that we do all of our conversion in. That's totally our gateway drug to get people into games that never would have otherwise. And so they have all of the materials that you would think you might need to create a game, but we just don't use the G word.
So you don't use the G word about your education. When will you be comfortable with coming out that you do have a game education?
I mean, it's interesting. So we have the first step. They're in one of these classes. They express interest. They'll move on and end up making a game for their thesis. And then we have to work really hard to convince them to send it in to like Indiecade Festival and to send it in to the Independent Games Festival and whatever other festivals there are out there. That isn't necessarily an aversion to having their work thought of as games, but rather there's an aversion to the culture around games, we find. That they're a little bit apprehensive of putting their work out there into those spaces, and they're uncertain of how they will be responded to.
We can do one last question.
Yeah, hi.
Hey.
When you don't have game like specified in the courses, what motivations are like behind the students when they come? Why do they want to study what they do if what they do is games, but they don't know it?
Yes, a paradox. So the program is, it has an extremely vague title, Design and Technology, but neither word, like design isn't all we do, and technology, we have a very inclusive understanding of that. So this zipper on my sweatshirt is technology as far as we're concerned in our program. One of the big winners at Indiecade this weekend, guess how you played the game? With a sewing machine. That's kind of awesome, I think. So anyway, the program it's quite large. It's about 200 students in a given time. And so they can come in and do all sorts of different work. So they usually will be coming in, like one of the students that we had that was an Indiecade finalist, her background was in theater. And so she came in trying to figure out ways she could bring technology into her theater work more successfully. And once she got there, she sort of discovered, oh wait, technology plus theater plus play is a space that I can explore storytelling through. But I think it probably helps that we have Colleen and I on the faculty. So for the students who already know games and they know the kinds of things we do and the way we think about them, they'll come to us and then they end up helping us in the work to bring more allies into the fold, if you will. But there's a bit of a paradox there, isn't there? All right, I think I'm being given the signal to hush. So thanks, everyone.